basis. So I'm not here in my official capacity. I'm here as a fellow brother to share with you some of the things which I have found. I'm also very conscious that the issue around vaccinations is always a personal decision. So I'm not here to tell you what to do when it comes to vaccination. I'm not here to persuade you. Neither am I here to stop you from exercising your God-given right of choice. I'm also not here to sell any pharmaceutical products, whilst I will have a slide or a number of slides that talk about the different vaccines that are available. I am only doing that just to share with you some of the things I've come across, but in no way here to recommend or to sell any drug. I'm not paid by the pharmaceutical industry at all, and neither am I receiving any financial reward for this program. So apologies for taking time with that disclaimer, but I think in the times we're living in, it is very important to be very clear in terms of what perspective I am coming from. If we'd had more time, I would have really spent a bit more time talking about how I absolutely agree with the psalmist when he says, I was fearfully and wonderfully made, and my soul knows that very well. David says, I will praise you, for thou hast fearfully and wonderfully made me. And I do have a series, a health seminar that is entitled Wonderfully Made. And perhaps at a point in time in the future, if there is interest, I can come back and share with you the wonders of creation and how God, in his wisdom, really created us, and how science is beginning to help us to understand how wonderful we were created. It's fascinating that David, way before science as we know it now, David, way before microscopes were discovered, way before we had the advancements of science to really understand how the body works, how each body part works, he, with his very limited, and perhaps with the benefit now that we have of scientific advancements, could even say he was primitive. But even within that, he looked at himself and recognized how fearfully and wonderfully made the human body is. And the reason why I'm dwelling on that is sometimes we try to oversimplify how the body works. And sometimes when we then get information, it is too simplistic to try to explain something which is very complex. I'll take you back to your biology lessons when you were doing your GCSEs, and some of you maybe have even progressed this to a much higher level. So we know that life is organized at different levels. We know that its cell is the building block. The cells then give you tissue, tissues give you organs, organs connect to give you organ systems, and then that's what gives you an organism. And even within the cell, there's quite a lot that happens in there. And so we need to be very careful when we hear stories or receive messages on social media telling us about how the virus is working in our bodies or how certain treatments are working intracellularly. We need to just be very careful that aligns with the science rather than a big assumption and a big jump that often is made when people communicate either to scare or to falsely reassure people about COVID-19 in this case, but also as it pertains to a whole range of other diseases. So yeah, the body is complex, and there is lots of stuff that we will just scrape the surface this afternoon that actually we could spend a lot of time going into much detail. Then the second thing I just wanted to talk about before we go into the detail for the topic we are talking about today is information disorders. So information disorders refers to when information is abused, when information is not shared correctly, and what happens as a result. So we know from those who have done a lot of work on information disorders that there is at least 3 categories of information disorders. You've got misinformation. So misinformation is the unintentional mistakes. So sometimes it's an inaccurate photo captions or inaccurate dates or statistics. Majority of the time they're unintentional. So someone makes a mistake and the information is false because it is not accurate, but it was never intended. And sometimes some of the misinformation is actually, yes, it is intentional, but there is no intention to cause harm. And I'm sure you will have received some jokes that actually either twist things a bit just for satire and for just creating humor. That's misinformation with no intention to harm. Now, the next level of the information disorder is disinformation. And once you start moving to the right, you start having false information that is deliberately falsified with the intent to harm or intent to prove a conspiracy theory or to spark a rumor. So there is information that is not correct that actually people are twisting with the deliberate intent. So these are people who know what they're doing and they are using that information to support their conspiracy theory or to start a rumor. Then there is malinformation. So malinformation is the deliberate publication of private information or personal or corporate information, which in some cases is actually true. But then the intention of sharing that information and sometimes the slight twist to the story, either the context, the date, and the time, creates the harm that the individual wants to achieve. So this is true information, but the context is changed. And I'll give you some examples, and I'll hopefully it will become very clear to you why I'm spending a bit of time, because we are receiving and we're being bombarded with lots of information around coronavirus, and lately around the vaccine. And it's very important that we all have a good understanding that not all of that information is true. Some of it is unintentional mistakes. Some of it is actually deliberate acts to prove a conspiracy. And some of it is half-truths, but then the context is changed. And if you're not very careful, you can form a decision based on information that is not right. So Claire Waddell, in their article published in 2017, they talk about 7 forms or the common forms of information disorders. And if we'd had more time, we would share some examples of information that is circulating about the vaccine, and maybe just did a quick exercise to say, which box do you think that sits in? So to the extreme left is, as I said, no intention to cause harm, but actually could fool some people. So it could be a joke, it could be parody, but there's no intention to cause harm. The next to that will be false connection. So this is when someone shares information and changes the headline. So if all you do is read headlines, then you miss the fact that this is not accurate. So people play around with words, they play around with titles, and in the generation and the time we're living in, when people do not have time to really read for themselves, some people are fooled by headlines. So that is an information disorder. But actually, if you read the details, you will find that the actual information is there. Then there's misleading content. So this is when someone tweaks the content to satisfy their own intentions. So you read the content and you go, oh, right. But then you try to collaborate that with other sources, and then you find, well, actually, this does not quite make sense, and the content has been changed. Then there's the false context, where someone gives you genuine information, but the context is changed. So someone could say to you something around the vaccine, which is actually true. So I'll give you an example that the Australian government has withdrawn its contract to supply vaccines with one pharmaceutical company because the vaccine has been shown to cause HIV. So there is an element of truth. Yes, the Australian government did stop their contract, but actually it is not in terms of what is being told to people. And I'll come back and I'll explain some of that. So don't worry about that. We'll cover some of the prevailing myths and prevailing information disorders. Imposter is when you might hear something being said that so-and-so said this. So you might hear that certainly in this context, that the BUC president has said this, or it might say the GC president has said this. So someone is impersonated, but actually they never said it. And you know that that person exists, but actually the content has been changed. Then you do have manipulated content where people cut the bits they don't like, leave the ones that they want, and it gives misinformation. And then the last one is purely fabricated. So all the content is 100% false, and it is intentionally designed to deceive and to do harm. So those are the different ranges of information disorders. And I make no apologies for spending time on that, but I just thought it'd be useful so that when you receive information, you verify it for yourself and make sure that it does not fit into any of these 7 common forms of information disorders. So that's by way of introduction. Now I'll whiz through a number of slides now, specifically to do with COVID-19 vaccination. So we all know, sadly, that COVID-19, certainly in the United Kingdom and in the US, has really devastated lives. But it has devastated disproportionately more people from Black, Asian, and minority ethnic groups. And I'm sure most of us really had and watched with horror and with compassion as we saw more and more people who looked like us being reported, be it on Sky News, on BBC News, that they had succumbed to the infection. Some of these people might be very close to people on here. Some of them might be colleagues of your parents, of your cousins. And we pray that God may give the families and those who are bereaving comfort in these very difficult times. And we know last week, some of you might have seen, well, it's this week actually, I might have seen that the UK has really gone beyond the 100,000 deaths mark, and huge numbers. And behind every single one of those deaths is a family and community that is still grieving. But we know that COVID-19 has not just been about life and death. COVID-19 has also changed so many things that we do. It has affected how people are working. It has exposed some of the underlying issues that as a society, certainly in the United Kingdom, we're struggling with. Things such as racism, things such as being targeted and not really being listened to. So we did a piece of work with a number of my colleagues, and we had this published in a journal where we described the COVID-19 experiences of Zimbabwean health and care workers in the United Kingdom. And this was based on listening to people, a survey that involved over 120 people, and weekly Zoom calls where we're asking people about their experiences. And you could change the title, take out Zimbabwean and just say COVID-19 experiences of health and care workers in the United Kingdom for you to recognize the devastation COVID-19 has had on health and care workers. Some of you listening here will be working in that sector, and I'm sure you will have your own personal experiences and those of your colleagues to talk about. So given that context, any remedy that comes through the fear, the anxiety that we have regarding COVID-19, the economic disruption it has had, any remedy that comes through surely if it works and if it's safe, then we really should embrace it. But we shouldn't just embrace it just because someone said so, but we should embrace it because we have tested it for ourselves and we've established that actually these things are as they are being described. So some of the basics around vaccinology, which is the study of vaccines, and again, I'm not a vaccinologist. My area of interest and practice is public health, which does cover vaccines as well. But what we know from the history, vaccines are held as the second most significant public health invention after water and sanitation, in terms of the impact vaccines have had on improving both the length of life and the quality of life. Some of us come from environments where, had it not been for effective rollout of vaccination programs, some of us would not have been here, or if we'd been here, we would have some significant disabilities. So you can see there the examples of what happened to a number of infectious diseases when vaccines were introduced. Polio, you can see the massive decline in polio cases following the introduction of vaccination in 1956. The same could be said for measles. The same could be said for Haemophilus influenza type B. And those of you who go to universities will know that there is the vaccine for meningitis. And we know that for the last few years since we've had that vaccination programs, the meningitis cases amongst students of university age have drastically fallen as a result of people participating in those vaccination programs. So we know that vaccines do save lives. We know that vaccines have got a big impact in terms of reducing the impact of infectious diseases. So that is a fact that is confirmed by many independent research. So some of you might be wondering, so how does a vaccine work? And so this is a very, very basic attempt to outline what happens with a vaccine. So on the top there, above the line, is what happens when you are infected by an infectious microorganism. So it can be a virus, it can be a bacteria, it can be any of the microorganisms that cause disease. And what happens is, once infected, the body then tries to deal with that. And if you think about this as some kind of internal war inside your body, there's 4 potential outcomes. It's either your body conquers and you recover, or sadly, your body is overwhelmed and you die, or you do recover with some disability. And for some diseases, your body then recovers and remembers. And the importance of immune memory is that should your body be exposed again, depending on the strength of the immune memory, it could fight very quickly without disease taking impact on you. So I'll come back to that in terms of what we currently know on the people who have had COVID-19 and how long the immune memory lasts. So we know for some diseases, immune memory can last for a very, very long time. But for some diseases, sadly, the immune memory needs constantly to be rebooted. And actually, if you're not very careful, you can repeat the same process if you are exposed again. So you get the infection, and sadly, despite the fact that you've recovered, you could go through the same process and end up with any of those 3 outcomes. So vaccination is mainly an attempt to mimic the same process within your body, but without causing disease. So the way that vaccinations or vaccines do that is by introducing either the same microorganism, but in a very, very killed format, non-lethal format, but with enough parts of the virus for your body to be stimulated to have the immune response. But the reason why you don't get the disease is because the antigen that is being used is weakened or is dead, or you're just using parts of that antigen. So what then happens after your vaccine is your body responds and you create the immune memory. You don't need to recover because there is no disease, and you don't die from that specific disease because there is nothing active there that causes you the disease. So that's basically how vaccines work in very high level principles. It's trying to mimic what would have happened had you had the disease by using something that is like what would have given you disease, but without the disease causing power, if you like. So there's two broad groups of vaccines. So you can either take the actual agent that would have caused disease, you inactivate it, and there's so many different methods of doing that. You introduce it into the body, and the body responds, and you create the immune memory. So an example is the rabies vaccine. It's an inactivated rabies microorganism, and it stimulates your body to respond. Or you can have an attenuated or an weakened microorganism, and your body responds, but the microorganism is so weakened that it cannot generate the disease. Or you can have what are called subunit vaccines. So subunit vaccines are mainly about taking part of the microorganism and putting that into the vaccine so that your body recognizes what looks like the vaccine or parts of the vaccine, mounts an immune response, and then that way you then develop the immune memory, and then the next time you're exposed to the real thing, then your body quickly recognizes, mobilizes itself, and it stops the microorganism before it has grown enough to cause you disease. So those are the two types of vaccines, and I'll come back in terms of the specific COVID-19 vaccines that we have, because we do have a wide spectrum of vaccines to cover that whole classification that are either currently under development or actually have emergency use approval for use in the UK, the US, and many more countries are joining onto that. So what is in a vaccine? So this is just generally speaking, vaccines tend to have the active ingredient. So this can be the weakened or killed microorganism or a subcomponent of that. So that is the active ingredient that will trigger the immune response. And that's the most important part of a vaccine. Sometimes vaccines have what's called adjuvants. So these are things that will help trigger the immune response. So they might help facilitate the body to recognize that this is foreign, and they generally pose no significant risk to health in the micro quantities that they are used. So we know that they sometimes put things like aluminium, and the levels are actually lower than what you find in some of the water that we drink. So yes, you might hear people saying, oh, well, the current vaccine has got potassium chloride, the same drug that is used in lethal injections, so it's going to kill you. Well, yes, it does have potassium chloride, but it is not at the level that would kill you. And in fact, the levels that are in there are probably significantly lower than the level of potassium you get exposed to every day in bottled water or in eating fruit and vegetables. So that's where you need to be very careful with some of the information. So that is true, but actually they then make a big jump in terms of the levels of doses that are in there. Vaccines sometimes contain residual traces, which has just been basically part of the manufacturing process. So things like formaldehyde, which we know is naturally found in lots of our bodily functions, the quantities that we're talking about. But we also know that formaldehyde is used for in the preservation of bodies. We know that formaldehyde is found in cigarettes, and at high levels can be toxic. But actually, what is the level of doses that is within these vaccines? So I'm kind of trying to explain things as we go along and hopefully answering some questions people might have. Sometimes some of these products are derived from animal products. Sometimes they're derived from pork, so pigs. Sometimes they are derived from eggs or egg supplements. And so for some people who have got those concerns, they are always hesitant. But the vaccines that we have got used in the UK have no animal products. The vaccines we have in the UK have no egg products. And the vaccines we have in the UK have mostly tried to avoid anything that is derived from nuts because of the nut allergy issue. The vaccines we have also do not have any material from aborted fetuses. So I know there has been a myth that actually these vaccines have been taken from cells from aborted fetuses. That is incorrect. That is disinformation, and that is not the case. So here's an example. I won't spend too much time on here. I mean, you can look up for yourself. The information is made very transparently. So this is a sticker that tells you what is inside a vial that comes in with for Pfizer BioNTech. So the Pfizer BioNTech, it comes in multiple dose vials, and each vial contains 5 doses. And this is the information that is there regarding the ingredients. So the active ingredient is a synthetic messenger RNA. So I'll come back to what that does. And then it's got the inactive ingredients. So if you think back on what we said there, the inactive ingredients are basically lipid nanoparticles. When people hear the word nano, they start thinking, could this be chips? No, actually, lipid nanoparticle just basically means a covering of fat. So it is, someone who was listening to was talking about, if you put a drop of oil in a glass of water, you can see the oil coming together. Just think about that at a microscopic level. So this is the protection for the mRNA, so that it is not degraded before it achieves what it should do. Potassium chloride, we've talked about. It's an adjuvant which just helps your immune system, and then a few other stabilizers that are within that. So the ingredients are always shared. They are there, and make sure that you quickly go through that to satisfy yourself. So this, again, a very, very crash course on what happens with our genetic material. So we know that human DNA is heavily responsible for the manufacture of human proteins, and proteins of any type. And what tends to happen is that the DNA stays in the nucleus, it comes out, it unwinds, it forms 2 strands of RNA, and each strand of RNA then attaches to ribosomes, and they then become your protein manufacturing centers, basically. And that is outside of the nucleus. Once out, this cannot go back in. So when people tell you that these vaccines will alter your DNA, there is no way, even of your own mRNA, to go back and to influence your DNA. So that's kind of a one-way street. And this is what happens with human DNA. Now, what the vaccines try to do is to send, so this is synthetically developed messenger RNA that is either delivered directly, so the Pfizer BioNTech and the Moderna, they've got synthetically developed mRNA that goes in, attaches in your cytoplasm or outside your nucleus to the ribosomes, and then create the spike protein. So the spike protein is the protein that allows the virus to attach to cells, get in there. And what viruses do, most viruses, they cannot replicate by themselves. They need a manufacturing plant, if you like. And what viruses do is they attach to a cell, they get in there. Once they are in, they start releasing the mRNA, and they use your cells to replicate. So what the process of vaccination is doing is introducing the mRNA, it attaches to your ribosomes, and it produces the spike protein. So it is not producing the virus, it is producing the protein that is on the surface of the virus. And so the spike protein, your body then recognizes that as foreign, in the same way it would have recognized that this being the full virus. And it mounts the response based on the spike protein and creates the immune memory that way. And once you've got that memory, the next time you're then exposed, then your body mounts a response much, much earlier, and that's how you get the protection. So we know that the vaccines have demonstrated effectiveness towards altering the severity of disease, but we still don't know whether they stop you from transmitting. So the protection you get from these vaccines is to alter the chances or reduce the chances of you developing severe disease. And it's mainly because you've now got an immune memory. Your bodies have been exposed to the spike protein before, So when it gets the actual virus exposure, it recognizes the spike protein and it moves in quickly and responds. And so you end up perhaps with no symptoms or with very mild disease, and you then don't progress to the severity of disease and the poor outcomes that we get with the virus. So that's a crash course on immunology. Those of you who might be listening, who might be immunologists, might feel I haven't done justice to the subject, but when you're talking to a very wide range of an audience, it is just trying to give people sufficient enough information to discredit some of the claims that are being made around the vaccine. Most of you might have heard, there's been quite a lot of coverage now on vaccine hesitancy. So vaccine hesitancy has existed for a very long time. Vaccine hesitancy is when people are reluctant or a little bit concerned about participating in a vaccination program, despite it being made available for them. So this is not about those people where there is no access. You can't be hesitant for something that's not there, but this is mainly for people where the vaccination program is there, but for various reasons, people are hesitant to participate. And the literature classifies the reasons for hesitancy into three broad groups. The main one being about confidence. Can I trust this vaccine? Is it safe? Is it effective? Does it have side effects? That tends to be the main concern for people who are hesitant. Some of it is complacency. So sometimes it's the low level of perceived risk of the disease. And people go, well, you know what? I'm fit and well. If it hits me, I'll probably be okay. So why expose myself, especially if I've got low levels of trust? So I'll hedge my bets and I will not participate in this because my perception of the risk is very low. The risk with that complacency is we now know a lot more people who are fit and well and younger who have responded badly to the disease. If you speak to anyone who has had COVID-19, especially those people who, when we classify it, we say they've had mild disease, they'll tell you there's nothing mild about it. So even people who did not need to go into hospital will tell you that this thing is nasty. It stops you in your tracks, and you kind of sometimes on the borderline of actually, do I need to go into hospital? Because of the level of breathlessness, the pain, the discomfort, the loss of taste, and the general wider systemic effects of that. So when people perceive the risk of the disease, they need to perceive that within the context of how this thing is developing. Then there is the issue around convenience. Well, yeah, I've been invited, but I can't get time off work. I can't get to the vaccination center. It is not readily available. It is not affordable, or it is not acceptable. But the issue, certainly for us in the UK, the issue around cost is not a barrier because that is available free of charge. And the issue around availability is also increasingly being tackled by evening clinics, weekend clinics. So they're trying to reduce the convenience issue, and discussions such as this hopefully will help people to have a bit more confidence. There's lots of information that is now coming out to really give people the information they need around, can this be trusted? And also information around complacency. Being hesitant about this vaccine in and of itself is not wrong because of numerous reasons. One of the reasons is this vaccine has been developed at a very, very rapid pace. So it is very, very acceptable for people to have concerns, but it's very important that your concerns are then, they lead you to searching the information, and then you make an informed decision rather than being swept by the wind of different myths that are being circulated. So in public health, we classify the population. We like to classify people by characteristics. This one is classifying people by their readiness to accept vaccines. So you will have people who generally accept all vaccines. You'll have people who accept, but they have doubts. Then you've got people who accept, but they delay. And then you've got people who just say, you know what, I do not agree with vaccinations as a matter of principle. So whether it is this one or the ones that are already there, or any ones that are to come, I just generally do not agree with the whole principle. And I think the people in the vaccine refusers and deniers, there isn't much you can do to convince them. If it is a matter of principle that they do not agree with vaccines, then you might have to agree to disagree. But the rest of the groups, people who are open to considering information and making a decision for themselves, are perhaps worth having a conversation and a debate and giving them the information, and then they can make their own decisions. When this vaccine first arrived, the majority of people accepted but had doubts. The majority of people will say to you, you know what, I have participated in vaccination programs from being a baby. My mom ensured I was fully vaccinated, and anything that I was eligible for, I would go and participate in it. But for this one, I've got concerns, and I'm not so sure if it's safe, and I just need a bit more information. And then when they get that information, they then move into the acceptance. So the hesitancy is not on itself, and we should not stigmatize when people have got questions. When it comes to COVID-19 vaccine, there is no daft question. There is no, oh, don't be silly. We need to really listen to people and understand what are your reasons. And if there is an explanation, then provide that explanation. If there isn't, and we don't know, and being open and honest to say, you know what, that question, I just don't know, rather than making things up because people will then find it out, or they'll make their decision based on information that you have given them, and you have misled them, and you have contributed to an information disorder. So even when we are going to do the question and answer session, Dr. Nganunu and myself will try to answer as much as we know. There might be questions that will say, I haven't heard about that, I don't know, but we'll go and find out and come back to you. So that's the vaccine hesitancy. Studies are emerging now on why people are hesitant in terms of the COVID-19 vaccine. So this is a paper published in the European Journal of Epidemiology, and says, why are people concerned about the vaccine? And we can see that the majority of people, over 3/4, have got safety concerns. And the safety concerns are around quality control. Has this been rushed? What are the side effects? What is the associated illness? Let me just wait and see those who have had the vaccine. I'll wait till next year, or I'm planning to start a family. So those are safety concerns. Then there's people who doubt, does this really work? And then there is people who basically fall into the complacent category, which is the disease is mild. You might have heard people saying 80% of the people have mild symptoms and they recover. 15% have mild, moderate disease. And yes, it stops them in their tracks, but they do recover. And it's only the 5%. And so far, it has been predominantly the older people with underlying health conditions. But as I said, we're beginning to see even younger people who are fit and well ending up needing intensive care treatments. So those are the reasons. And you can see that the majority of us on this session, you might be able to identify with either one or more of these. And that in itself is not wrong. It's all fine for you to have concerns. It's what you do about those concerns and how do you seek the information. This is a study that was done looking at different countries, and people were basically asked the question, if a vaccine were made available for you this week, would you get it? And this was done way before the vaccination program started, but they're still updating. So as late as the 31st of December, 70%, 71% of people in the United Kingdom said yes. And you can see that it's ranging from very low all the way to very high. But then that hides some of the differences that we know exist within community groups. We know that people have got concerns around safety, around side effects, and then there are people who reject in principle. So we said almost three quarters of people in the UK said yes. But when you start analyzing that data by ethnicity as one example, it is estimated that up to 70% of people from Black, Asian, and minority ethnic groups are hesitant about the vaccine. And if you think about some of my opening slides about the disproportionate impact on Black, Asian, and minority ethnic groups, then vaccine hesitancy in our people is a matter of significant concern, because the vaccine works, it is safe and it's effective. And if the people who have been hardest hit are not taking it and they're at the highest risk, then sadly we might see even more deaths continuing to be disproportionate within our communities. So that's why it's very, very important that we spend our time really reassuring people, listening to their concerns, not dismissing things as, oh, well, don't be silly, but actually listening to what is their concern and providing reassurance where it exists so that we can increase the uptake of the vaccine, certainly across the entire population, but perhaps more importantly, in people of Black, Asian, and minority ethnic groups. So the COVID-19 vaccine, what are the different types of vaccines? So again, this could take a whole year of you studying these COVID-19 vaccines, but generally speaking, there is at least 6 different platforms that vaccines will come under. So you have got DNA-based vaccines. So these are vaccines that will insert synthetic DNA, and then that DNA, once it's in the cell, it unwinds, and then the RNAs then lead to the production of the protein. And it's predominantly the spike protein that you're trying to get your cell to produce, your body to attack it, and to create that memory. Then you've got RNA vaccines. So the 2 that have got emergency use approval in the UK are the Pfizer BioNTech, and the Moderna. They are both RNA vaccines, and they are already being rolled out across the UK. Less so with the Moderna. The Pfizer is the one that started off in the UK, and we now also got the Oxford and AstraZeneca vaccine. Then there are still some vaccines that are still under trial. So you remember what I said, that you can either take parts of the microorganism, or you can have the whole microorganism killed under heat or chemicals to trigger the same thing. So they are still under development. Then you have a viral vector vaccine. So this is basically where you use another virus, which again is attenuated, so it is killed, to deliver the RNA to generate that manufacture of a response to the spike. So the Oxford AstraZeneca is a viral vector vaccine, and it is now widely in circulation. Those of you watching the news will have heard about the Johnson & Johnson, which has demonstrated effectiveness at phase 3 trials, and they're now waiting for it to be granted emergency use powers. Johnson & Johnson one is of very significant interest because it is a single dose vaccine. The ones we've got so far are 2-dose vaccines, but Johnson & Johnson is a single dose vaccine and can be managed, does not require extremely low temperatures for it to be managed. So AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson don't require extremely low temperatures, whereas the Pfizer needs -70 degrees for it to be maintained potent, for it to achieve its function. So the less the temperature that's required to maintain its viability, the better really. And some of us who are from the African continent are really looking with interest, something that is easy in terms of the cold chain logistics for some of our areas that do not have the infrastructure. It's a challenge to get the Pfizer cold chain, even in this country. And I think in some of our countries of origin, giving them the Pfizer vaccine without putting the infrastructure might just not achieve the benefits. Then some of you might have heard, again, on Thursday, I was over the moon because of the Novavax, which again has come to the phase 3 trials. The reason why I was over the moon is that Novavax is being manufactured in Billingham. Billingham is where I used to live for many years. That's where my kids went to primary school. So to name drop and say, well, Novavax is being produced in an area where I used to live just filled me with excitement. But so that is still subject to emergency use powers. And then there are a lot other live attenuated vaccines still being developed. And what tends to happen with the news coverage is as vaccines get closer to the phase 3 publications, that's when the news will start to pick them up. So you will, over the next few days, you'll be hearing a lot about Johnson & Johnson and the Novavax, mainly because their research findings have just come out and they're showing be effective. You might later on, should all of these other ones progress, start to hear them being talked about in the news. So vaccines go through 5 phases of development. They start off on the bench as an experiment, testing in animal studies to see do they work and are they safe. Then they move on to the next phase where you have a small group of healthy adult volunteers who receive the vaccine to test, is this safe? The reason why you go for healthy adult volunteers is you can then monitor any adverse effects. So if someone is healthy and things change, then you're more likely to associate that with vaccine than if you did that with someone who had poorer health. Then phase 2 is when you start introducing the vaccine in people who have the same characteristics as those people whom you're targeting for the vaccine. And then phase 3, which I've talked about a lot, is when you run the trial for thousands and thousands of people. So the Pfizer BioNTech had 42,000 people. Moderna had 35,000, I think. Novavax had about 15,000. In the history of drug developments, these studies have included far more people than many other drugs that we use on a day-to-day basis. So again, they've been tested for safety and for effectiveness. And then phase 4 is once they've been given a license, they have to continue monitoring the side effects. And that is happening as we speak. People who have had the vaccine are being asked to report any side effects so that we continue to understand if there are wider implications. So this is the timeline for how the vaccine has been developed. It's unprecedented. It is a game changer, not just for coronavirus. Actually, it might lead the way for quite a number of things. So in January, the Chinese researchers released the genome for the virus, and by December, we already had phase 3 findings. Normally, this process should have taken between 10 and 15 or even 20 years, but this has all been truncated into a 12-month time period. And you can understand why people will be concerned that something that takes 10 years has taken slightly less than a year. But the rigor of the safety considerations have not been relaxed within that year. And some of the reasons why it has been so fast is because researchers were already looking at mRNA vaccines and the methodology over the years. And lately, we had the Ebola crisis in West Africa, and the developments towards an Ebola vaccine have also helped. Developments around HIV vaccine have also helped. So people already had this thinking in place, and it allowed researchers to build on that. But also the Chinese identified the genetic information and released it so early, which meant that scientists could start working on the vaccines at the earliest opportunity. There were no steps skipped in terms of the gateways from this being a laboratory experiment all the way through to licensing. But what allowed progress to be made was that some steps were done in an overlapping way. So again, they were considered at the earliest opportunity, and if there were no concerns, then things were then progressed. We cannot run away from the fact that a lot of money was thrown at this. One of the biggest challenges with developing new treatments, new vaccines, is who pays for it. In this case, we had a pandemic, governments were being drawn to a halt. We saw all those pictures of capital cities everywhere grinding to a halt, and that was costing governments money. So governments actually provided the funding. Big pharmaceutical companies took the risk and started manufacturing. So as an example, the Novavax vaccine made in Billingham that is not yet given the emergency powers, they already have stacks of the vaccine ready to dish out should they get the license. So all of that resource allowed people to do things at a much faster pace. And an example I often use are these Nightingale hospitals. It takes many years to build a hospital, but the Nightingales were done very quickly. Why? Because the government threw lots of money, the army was drafted in, and when you've got the resources and you've got the know-how, it cuts down a lot of the time that is usually taken in developing hospitals. And that's similar to what's happened with the vaccine development. And there are other reasons. Recruitment of participants, social media, the interest allowed researchers to have lots and lots more people in a very short time than it would have taken for other diseases. And then the nature of the disease is such that once you get the disease, you've got a small window for that to manifest in terms of symptoms. So you can monitor that and you can report on the findings very, very rapidly, unlike other diseases that have got a very long lead-in time. So to date, I have not updated this. I usually update this before my talk. But as of the 26th of January, 71.1 million people had received vaccine. If people were getting the shakes, or if they were fainting, or if it was causing them to have slurry speech, we would have seen that. And with the advent of social media and the news networks, we would have found that out very, very rapidly. So again, some people are saying, I had this vaccine, I can't walk, I can't talk. If that was the case, then we would have heard about that 7 to 1 million times. The UK is up there in terms of vaccinations. I think we're moving more towards the 8 million mark, but there's still a lot more, because we estimate we need about 25 million people to receive the vaccine. You can see the distribution across the world. I won't spend too much time there. Israel is up there in terms of having vaccinated the highest number of their people. The UK is not too far behind, United Arab Emirates. So again, all over the world, or in most parts of the world, the vaccine is being rolled out. This is a world map that really pains my heart. So you can see the distribution is across the entire world, other than Africa. As of last week, some of you might have seen Tedros, who is the WHO Secretary General, making an appeal to say, as of the 18th of January, Africa had only received 25 doses. 25, and that's not a mistake. It's not that I have misread. 25 vaccines. Some of you who watch the BBC Question Time will know that on Wednesday, Thursday, so I was listening to it, the presenter said by then Africa had received 55 doses, 55, for the number of people we have in Africa. So we know that the pandemic is global in nature. It does not respect any borders. The reason why we've got the South African variant now in the UK is exactly the point, that we are not safe until everyone is safe. And so there is a big call now for global solidarity. I mean, some of the Western countries, they've got 4 times the amount of vaccines that they need on order. And how can that be just, and how can that be justified going forward? So we cannot be safe until we start seeing vaccinations being rolled out in Africa. There is a program called COVAX, which is an international coalition, and I'm reliably informed that from the beginning of next week, South Africa will receive quite a significant batch, and hopefully that should start. We should start to see countries in Africa receiving the vaccine. But also we then need to make sure that the availability of the vaccine is also matched with the acceptance of the vaccine, and that people don't have the hesitancy, because that will just continue to kill people as well. So here in the UK, the vaccination is being delivered by the NHS. The general rule is don't really contact the NHS. The NHS will contact you. It is going through a prioritization program, so started with the over 80s, health and care staff. We're now into the people in their 70s, and also clinically extremely vulnerable. The principle behind this is protect your most vulnerable people as quick as you can. So if you get an invitation, it means you are vulnerable and you are at risk. You are at risk either because of your age, you are at risk, or you are at risk because of underlying health conditions, or you are at risk because you are a health and care worker, and your risk of exposure because of the nature of your business is so high that we need to protect you. You are more likely to end up being exposed to the infection, and we want to make sure that your body is as prepared. So we are not in a universal vaccination program yet. We are not just saying, come here and we'll jab you, as one audio I listened to that just said, people are being asked to line up and being jabbed and they're dropping off. That is disinformation. No one will be lined up. You will be called in relation to your risk category. And at the moment, it's the highest risk people who are being invited. So the fact that you receive a letter or a phone call means that you are at a higher risk, either because of occupational exposure, or you are at higher risk of developing severe disease because you've got underlying health conditions, or because of your age. And the Joint Committee on Vaccinations and Immunizations in the UK has come up with 8 categories, and they are working their way through that. So given this is an Adventist audience, I just thought I would share with you the church position on this, too small for you to read, but the church has come up with a position which says that we are very strong on health and well-being, the health message, and biblical revelation through the writings of E.G. White, and also we rely on peer-reviewed scientific literature. And we encourage responsible immunization and vaccinations, and there are no religious or faith-based reasons not to encourage our church members to respond or to participate in the program. We value the health and safety of the population, and it includes maintenance of herd immunity. However, we are not the conscience of the individual members and recognize that people have got individual choices. And these are to be exercised by the individual. The choice not to be immunized or to be immunized should not be seen as dogma or the doctrine of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So that is the official church position, that there is no religious reasons or faith-based reasons to not participate in the program. And that is further substantiated by the fact that one of our biggest health institutions, Loma Linda University. So if you Google Loma Linda University, you'll see this is their landing page, that they are running COVID-19 vaccine clinics. And they've now extended them to run them out in the community. This is the US Department for Veterans Affairs webpage. So this is not a Seventh-day Adventist website. It is a US government department. And they parade these two gentlemen who are veterans who took up their golden opportunity to receive COVID-19 vaccine. And because they live in California, they received it through the Loma Linda healthcare system. Here's another one from Loma Linda, where they are vaccinating their staff as well, recognizing that occupational hazard or occupational risk of exposure. I won't go through these groups. We can come back to them in the question and answer session. So I'll just finish off by just my own personal position. Was I hesitant when the vaccine was first being developed? Of course I was. Did I receive information, misinformation, disinformation, malinformation? Of course I did. What did I do? Well, I sought to satisfy myself, both professionally and personally. And on the 7th of January, I received my Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, and I am counting down the weeks until I receive my second dose of the vaccine. So as far as I'm concerned, I think I'm still well, I'm still sane. I am not being controlled remotely, as others might suggest. And I know that my DNA has not changed as a result of that. So I'll leave you with that picture of my personal position when it comes to COVID-19 vaccines. Thank you very much, and I'll hand you back to the chair.
Thank you very much, Professor. That was really superb. I know we went really quickly there, but there's a lot of things for us to take away and think about. Now, I know we're running against time, and what we've been doing is collating questions. As you were talking there, I could see loads of questions coming in. And so just prepare yourself now for the Q&A session. What our youth have been doing is taking down the questions, and we've tried to group them in order to stop, repeating questions. So we group them in sort of groups, and if there's a similar question, we sort of group it. So hopefully listen out and your question will be asked. So I'm going to go straight now to our first question. I don't know if Temwa, are you ready with our first question, please, for Dr. Lovemore and Professor Edward Knonga?
Okay, so the first question that we've got two around the same subject. So why were there some people saying that the COVID vaccine will cause infertility? And with that one, we've also got, how about the side effects of the vaccine? And how about the long-term effects?
Okay. I don't know if can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Tama, and thank you, Prof, ever so much for your insight. So basically, Tama, this virus, this vaccination, the side effects have been tabulated already. You can have local pain from the injection site. You can have fatigue, but you can never have, the vaccine does not cause the disease because we are not injecting you the actual virus. So you can never get COVID-19 from vaccination, but it will give you reported side effects, which local pain from, so the minor ones have been reported a lot. And then a few have had massive allergic reactions. So, and then of course, there's been a question about infertility, which is what you're bringing on. Some people are worried about infertility. So should pregnant mothers or people who plan to have family get the vaccine? And so far, the argument which people were using was some people were arguing that, oh, you are going to affect the attachment of the placenta to the uterus. And there was a protein they were arguing that, oh, maybe it could be affecting, but there is no evidence of infertility being caused by the vaccination. Remember, this is a vaccination. We're giving this vaccine to try to protect our lungs, okay, to modify the disease in the people like me and you. I'm 52. I'm 52 years old. I'm not, but but old. But I've had coronavirus now for nearly 3 weeks. I've been coughing. I've been having fever. I went through the worst period, maybe. That's what I still think. I'm still thinking I'm out of it, but I'm not 100% out. And this happened the week I was about to get vaccinated. I'm always questioning. I'm always questioning myself. If I had the vaccine and then I had, say, 3 to 4 weeks so that antibodies can be produced, what would my response be? So it's one of those things where I believe if the science is backing up benefit, whether the benefit is 62%, 90%, 95%, the most honest public testimony is that those who are vaccinated are less likely to get severe disease. The same way, those who are living healthy lives right now, building up good practices of good eating, exercise, they are less likely also to get fatal outcomes, but they are not necessarily excluded from nasty outcomes. They can. So the idea of really doing everything you can to protect the body is very, very important. So on pregnancy, it does not affect infertility. It is not. There's no evidence at all. I've already checked that question on the websites. On the scientific evidence from CDC, there's no evidence that it affects infertility. I know the science behind people's arguments, but it doesn't affect infertility. People who are planning to have children should be vaccinated. Like Professor Kunonga said, those outcomes are you recover fully, you die, and question is, what we're better off recovering so that we can have more babies. That's my simple way of answering. Right. I want to recover from coronavirus and then I can have more babies. Otherwise, so I want mothers to be healthy, to be protected from coronavirus, and then the mothers can have more babies and more babies because they have been protected from coronavirus. That's my simplistic answer. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Sorry, just to add on that.
Yes, go ahead, please, Prof.
Yeah, no, just to add on that. So when they did the trials for these vaccines, you remember when I said that the criteria for inclusion is people who are fit and well. So they actually did not recruit pregnant people onto the trial. So that's one of the reasons for those who are already pregnant, why you need to really discuss with your clinician and you do a risk-benefit assessment. But we know the Royal College of Obstetrics and Gynecology's position is that it is better to be protected, especially if your risk of exposure is greatest, because we have seen, sadly, situations where the mom gets the coronavirus, end up with COVID-19, and you then have to have an emergency cesarean section. And sadly, there's been reported cases where the mom has died and the baby has been saved. So for those who kind of are already pregnant, it's a case-by-case discussion, and you'll be given the appropriate advice. The additional thing regarding fertility, it has been published, although it was not. So when you do studies, there are things that are called incidental findings. So the incidental finding, which is of interest around fertility, is that despite the fact that when people joined the trial or the research, they were told that if you are pregnant, then don't join. During the time when you're in the trial, use contraception so that you don't become pregnant. We now know that there were 23 people who then became pregnant when they were during the trial. So actually, if these things caused infertility, then those people would not have gone on to become pregnant whilst they are receiving the vaccine. So whilst it was not an intended thing that was reported, it was an incidental finding, which can help substantiate the fact that the impact on fertility is not as people are describing it. Then there was one person who then had a miscarriage during that time, because the issue regarding the placental rejection, if you like, is not about a fertility issue. It is more about whether then you then have a miscarriage rather than conceive. And what we now know, again, another incidental finding, that there was one person during the trial who had a miscarriage, but that one person, when you track it back, whether they received the active or the placebo. So when you're doing a trial, you give someone something which has got the active ingredient and someone something which does not have it, and that's how you compare. When they track back, the individual who had a miscarriage had received the placebo. So actually the reason for the miscarriage was not really related to the vaccine. So whilst they were not designed into the trial, you have got reports that can help you, as well as what Dr. Nganunu said, that it is not biologically plausible for that to affect fertility.
Got it. Thank you, Professor Kanonga. I'm going to go over to Temwa Ntonga. Temwa, you've been looking at the questions. What's the next question, please, for our two panelists?
Well, we've got a couple questions on YouTube, and one of them is, what is the mortality rate of children under 18 who are not eligible for the vaccine?
So what is the mortality rate
Of children under 18 who are not eligible for the vaccine?
Oh, good question. At the moment, children have shown amazingly recovery rates from coronavirus. I have seen a few children with coronavirus who come into the A&E smiling, happy, and feverish, and you do the test and they're positive. But their father, who is my age or older, can die from coronavirus. So surprise, surprise, children have this amazing resilience and even recovery rate. However, that doesn't mean that we've not lost, we have lost a few children, but many of them have complicated with one of the rare multi-inflammatory sort of where just so much inflammation going on in the body. Their heart is affected, and the lungs are affected, and they end up dropping their blood pressure and then going to intensive care. I mean, there's a big word for it, but in short, in general, we haven't seen children dying from coronavirus very much as compared to adults. I don't have the statistics to show you the mortality rate of coronavirus across the age, but you realize it's mostly adults. The risk of death is so high, you know, above 60, above 70. The risk of death is very high. If you Black, Asian, minority, ethnic, as already been described, and you saw the picture of the people who work in the health industry. Those who died, if you look at them, they look like, most of them look like me. And so basically children have not, and we just thank God for this, because we don't know why. So the mortality rate children dying of coronavirus are so few in between, which is why government was willing to allow children to go to school. So in short, very, very, very. So, so because they're not high risk, they're not even on the list. We're not calling them for vaccination at the moment, but I think government will be selectively choosing people based on their risks. As Professor Kunonga said, they'll be called in for vaccination. So I've had the coronavirus, which means I won't be vaccinated for 90 days, but after 90 days, I'm going to get another shot because the coronavirus infection I've had, I will produce antibodies, but after 5 months, I think so far that's what scientists begin to say, after 5 months, those antibodies will start dropping. People who have had the vaccination right now, they are already boosted to respond to the coronavirus in advance before they get infection. By the time they get infection, the vaccine will modify the severity of the illness they get. What if all they got was a little sniffly, a little fever for 2 days and then gone because the vaccination has modified the disease, rather than spend 3 weeks coughing, spluttering, breathless? I think, in addition to what Prof said, I'll repeat it again, water and sanitation and vaccination, big impact on our, I don't know why I'm giving long answers now, but that's the shortest answer. Thank you.
The next question says, what was your stance on vaccines before COVID and has that changed?
Good question. Prof, I'll answer this one because I'm a pediatrician. I vaccinate children. So at birth, we give you BCG if you come from high-risk areas of TB. So BCG, we give you a live vaccine, but it's already been, modified. And so I vaccinate. BCG will protect you against severe TB, which is meningitis. I vaccinate against polio. You don't see poliomyelitis anymore. I vaccinate against measles. There are only spots of measles outbreaks. I vaccinate against tetanus. I vaccinate against hepatitis B. I hardly see Haemophilus type B infections because of the vaccination since 1993. Prof. Kunonga put that slide very nicely. So I'm a strong believer of vaccination because it works. It's been tried. Vaccination's been there for a long time. You read the story of Onesimus. Onesimus was a slave from Africa who went to America in Massachusetts. And then he told one of the pastors and says, you know what, in Africa, people with smallpox, we take those who are infected and we infect those who are not infected so that they produce antibodies. And they didn't know about the whole science. But in short, it's been there since the 17th century, the principle of preparing the body so that it's armed with antibodies against the potential exposure to infection. So all the way back to the 17th century, that principle was known. It'd been modified, put into proper scientific doses, first dose, second dose, third dose, because we can see the response to adequate antibody levels. So before the coronavirus, I was a believer of vaccination. I still continue to vaccinate children. If you bring your children to me, for all you little young men and women who are here who are under 18 years, Dr. Nganunu will vaccinate you against HPV, I'll give you a booster, and so on. So you welcome small little injection, then it's a little bit itchy, that's it, and you're fine. So that's it really. I'm still, Prof. Kunonga, you can answer it for yourself. I don't want to answer for you.
Yeah, my answer is pre-COVID-19 vaccines really up for vaccinations. My previous role was the Director of Public Health for 2 local authorities in the northeast of England and used to oversee vaccination programs. And I'm actually looking forward to even more advances in vaccine developments because there's still quite a few diseases that ideally vaccines should help. So yeah, I am for vaccinations, both personally and professionally.
Okay, so the next question is, it has been observed that deaths were attributed to COVID when it clearly wasn't. I know of one of these cases of this. Would you say that this is disinformation?
Okay, so the question is trying to verify if we have called people who have died and we have said they died of coronavirus when they actually haven't.
Yes, I think it says it has been observed that deaths were attributed to COVID when it clearly wasn't. Yes.
Okay, so so people die from various complications. So people get coronavirus, they get sick, they cough, they start getting breathless, they go on intensive care, they go into a phase where their organs fail. So their kidneys fail and so on. In most cases, they would have had a COVID test anyway for us to reach the diagnosis. They would have a COVID test. Most of the time, if the COVID test is confirmatory, it's positive, it's easier. If the COVID test is negative, and yet the lungs show CT scan changes consistent with COVID, then it's still COVID. I'm just giving you the broad approach to diagnosis. So when people die, they die of complications. But the primary trigger for the patient who then complicates and dies would have been the COVID-19 infection, would have been the COVID-19 infection. So I think the question is asking, have we been wrong to attribute certain people to have died of COVID when actually it wasn't COVID? Well, I don't know I wouldn't want to say we are 100% accurate in our documentation, because people are looking for 100% accuracy. But in short, we do as much as possible to test, to give a death certificate which summarizes cause of death. So every doctor, when he issues a death certificate, must attribute cause of death. If he doesn't know, it goes to the postmortem and the coroner will issue the death certificate. So every death is treated and there must be a cause effect. So coronavirus deaths are documented. We are hearing the announcement, the following people died who have been positive coronavirus in the past 28 days. If we listen to BBC tonight, they'll say, we've lost so many people with coronavirus who were tested positive for coronavirus in the past 28 days. So they're giving you an updated picture of how many people have died who were positive for coronavirus. Our tests are getting better, getting smoother, and so on. I see Elder Dyson Zinyemba is here. I know he's been quiet, but Elder Dyson, you are the ones who do the test. You supervise the department that runs the test. That question is asking whether you are, with your department in Cambridge, accurate. Let me introduce Elder Dyson. He's a well-trained bioscientist, but he's a manager now at Cambridge. He's worked in infectious disease, laboratory, malaria, HIV, hepatitis, name it, way before I went to medical school. He then worked in Zimbabwe for years, way before I qualified. By the time I qualified, I found him, he had disappeared to Victoria Falls. So he's been in this game for years. So Elder Dyson, that question is asking you, how accurate are your tests?
So just before Elder Dyson comes in, sorry to jump in. So we are at 4 o'clock and the program was due to end at 4 o'clock. We do have other programs coming up after this. So panelist, Dr. Lovemore, Professor Edward, how much more time would you have? I think we can probably squeeze in 3 or 4 more burning questions before we have to close and potentially come back for a second discussion where we just go through Q&A because there are still a number of questions that have come through.
Okay, Professor Kunonga has a session at 6 o'clock. He has just thumbs up. It's fine. I'm okay. As you can see, I'm sitting in my little room and I'm okay. I'm here until midnight. So let's go on.
All right. So we'll put in 5 more questions and we'll try and put the answers in as briefly as we can so we can let the folk go to their next programs. Brother Dyson, if you could concisely answer that, that would be appreciated.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nganunu, for that introduction, which I don't deserve. The issue of people being wrongly diagnosed is very common. A lot of people have been given wrong results for very, very different reasons. Mislabeling of samples, which is a human error, and it's difficult to blanket a particular probably wrong information as standard, unless we look at it as individual and come up with the reasons why that particular individual was labeled as such. So in trying to answer that question of a person who is known, we do not provide a blanket statement for every patient. We look at that particular patient and find out the reasons why they were misdiagnosed in that incident.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dyson. All right, next question.
Okay, we have another question on YouTube. It says, some adults get affected mildly when infected. Would it be safe for such people to assume that they are safe not to get the vaccine?
Great question. That's a great question. Elder Kunonga, Professor Kunonga, your question, please.
Yeah, so absolutely, it is right that the international studies have shown that 80% of people who get the infection get mild disease. Up to about 15% have moderate disease, and then there is roughly 5% who end up needing hospitalization. And I can see where the question is coming from, that isn't it better for people to develop their own immunity than for us to try and introduce immunity artificially. Now, the challenge is we cannot with precision predict who will get mild disease. If we could do that, then absolutely, yes, that would hold. And so there is the issue around the difficulty in predicting how severe you will get in terms of your disease. There is also the challenge that, especially in terms of the risk of exposure, for those people with the greatest risk, there is something around the infective dose. And we know that the level of exposure has got something to do with the severity of disease. So that's one consideration. The second one is, even amongst people with mild disease, there is what people are now referring to as long COVID. So in the first few months, we thought only the people who have ended up in intensive care would end up with severe long COVID and would take the longest to recover. But we are increasingly finding out that even those people who manage themselves at home can also have long-term effects from COVID-19. So even if you pack the death argument that we cannot with precision predict who is likely to die, and this virus, remember, it's new, is teaching us every single day, and we're getting some reports of some people who don't fit the picture who are ending up with that scenario. So that's the argument regarding you can't predict how your body will respond, but even if you had mild disease, you can still have long COVID, which has got implications, provides us with information on how you then do the risk benefit. then added to the fact that the vaccine has demonstrated effectiveness and safety. So the risk of you boosting your immunity through the vaccine outweighs, I mean, the benefits outweigh the risk. But the risk of you leaving this to chance, some of you might have heard of a game the Russians play or supposedly play called the Russian roulette. So Russian roulette is you've got a loaded gun with 8 rounds in it, you know, those old pistols with rounds in them. You put 1 bullet in, you spin the round and you pull the trigger. 1 out of 8 times you will sadly pull the trigger when the bullet is lodged. So there is that issue around, yes, you can decide to take the chance and get your immunity by having active infection, but bear in mind that you then have 3 other potential outcomes. One is that you could recover and create immune memory. The second one is you could recover with disability. And then the third one is sadly, you could end up dying. And I know what I would choose if there is something that is safe and that is effective and that does not leave me with all those other different complications. So yes, I get the logic of why people would be saying that, but if you then go to the science, it's how much risk for the benefit are you willing to take?
Thank you, yeah. Okay, all right, next question. I think we've got 3 more questions and then we'll try and wrap up.
The next question is it wise to take the vaccine if you feel unwell beforehand?
So I'll deal with that. That's relatively easy and straightforward. So for any vaccination programs, you are always asked, have you had a fever? Are you generally unwell? And generally, you are not given a vaccine if you are not well, whether you are unwell with COVID or you are unwell with other things. Certainly, from an infection point of view, you don't want, because your body is less likely to mount an effective immune response if it is having to deal with other challenges. And the guidance, as Nganunu has said, is that if you have had active infection, give yourself time for your body to recover so that you are confident that you haven't got background infection.
Okay, so the next question is, why is it that the BAME community is more likely to die of coronavirus? And in the beginning, apparently the BAME community didn't die as much. So what has changed that now the BAME community is dying more?
Yeah, so I can respond to that. The official figures do show that Black, Asian, minority ethnic groups were overrepresented in terms of proportion. So we're not talking about total numbers of death. We're saying proportionate. Are you seeing a greater percentage of people? Because remember, these are minority ethnic groups. So if you looked at the total number without including the denominator, you might go, oh, well, what's the fuss all about? But it's a high number of a smaller percentage of the population. So it is disproportionately more. So if this was uniformly distributed and we experience amongst Black, Asian, and minority ethnic groups the same death rate, we would not have seen the total number that we have seen. So it is not about the absolute number of deaths, it is the proportion of deaths for minority ethnic populations. Now, as to why, I mean, we could spend another 2 hours talking about the why. There are issues with regard to disproportionate levels of exposure. So we know that people in Black, Asian, minority ethnic groups, they tend to be overrepresented in the occupations that would give you greater exposure. So that's one reason. Health and care, drivers, train drivers, bus drivers, people who did not have the ability during the first lockdown to work from home. So most of these jobs meant that they could not work from home and they would go out as essential workers. And so they then get disproportionately more exposed compared to the rest of the population. So that's one reason. The second one is the disproportionate access to some of the preventative measures. So we know, I mentioned in our talk that we did a paper on the Zimbabwean health and care workers. One of the big issues that came up was around access to personal protective equipment. and the long-standing issues around racism at work, being disempowered, added to the pressure for some of being on a 0 hours contract. So you tell me to stay at home, and actually I'm an agency worker. If I stay at home, how then will I be able to support my family here and my family back home? So that disproportionate ability for you to work from home, to practice the social distancing measures without compromising your general life, affected Black, Asian, minority ethnic people a lot more than it did some of the white populations. Then there is the issue added to that of the disproportionate representation of our communities in people with underlying long-term conditions. So we have known for a long time that the prevalence of diabetes, as an example, is up to 6 times more for people from South Asian subcontinent. We know that the prevalence of hypertension is significantly higher in people of sub-Saharan African origin. So those are some of the conditions that we know that if you get COVID and you've got those underlying conditions, regardless of whether you're Black, white, or other, that would not give you a good fighting chance for surviving that. But what drives some of those underlying long-term conditions is the conditions in which people live, the conditions in which we work. You are constantly under stress, you are constantly marginalized, and surely even the healthiest of us, that continuous stress can lead to long-term conditions. So that's why the solution for this disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on Black and Asian minority ethnic groups is not just about giving them priority access to vaccination. It is not just about giving them extra PPE. It is addressing the underlying issues, the social issues, multi-household occupations. You tell people to go and socially distance. You tell people if you've got a case, someone then has to socially isolate it in a bedroom. And you've got 2 bedrooms and 3 kids. So how do you manage some of that social distancing measures? Your kids need to be in the same room as you. You're fighting over who has got the laptop now. So the ability to really implement the preventative measures that we know work is not uniformly distributed. And so Black and Asian minority ethnic groups also already started a disadvantage in terms of being exposed, a disadvantage in terms of underlying health conditions, a disadvantage in the ability to exercise those things that would prevent, and then a disadvantage of historic social injustices that we have faced for a very long time. So unless those things are addressed, then we will continue to see the disproportionate impact. And so things like vaccines, absolutely important as a short-term measure. Access to PPE, absolutely important, but what needs readdressing is the social injustice that exists for Black, Asian, and minority ethnic groups. And if that is not addressed, yes, we might get over COVID-19. If we end up, God forbid, but if we have another pandemic, we will see the same pattern. I mean, I was in a talk where we talked about what COVID-19 has done is it has not brought anything new. It has just exposed the injustices that were there. Black people, Asian minority ethnic groups were dying prematurely from cancers, from heart disease, from suicides, from mental health, but that was under the carpet. We know now that from the time of being infected to the time if you are going to die, it is 30 days, up to no more than 6 weeks. So there's no place to hide. For hypertension, you can go for 30, 40 years. Diabetes, you can go for 30, 40 years. Some cancers, you can live for a long time. So there is a place to hide for those in authority and those in power. COVID-19 has taken away the hiding places and has exposed this for all to see that someone who was walking well Christmas time, by the middle or the end of January, sadly, they are history because of the nature of the disease. So, yeah, I mean, you have touched your own nerve. As you can see, it's one agenda I'm really passionate about, that this is not just about a biomedical explanation. This has to take into account the social injustices that have existed for a long time. And if they are not addressed, then we're sticking plasters.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Kunonga. That is so, it's so clear. Thank you for that. I think we'll take 2 more questions from our youth there, and then we'll look to round off. And once those 2 questions have been asked, Dr. Lovemore, if you could just close for us with a word of prayer.
Another question that we have on YouTube is, will people need annual boosters of the vaccine?
Will people need
annual boosters of the vaccine?
Yeah, so I can take that in the interest of time. So the indications so far are that it is likely that we will need some form of annual program similar to the annual program we have for flu. But that is still being monitored in terms of how long the immune memory that we talked about, how long that lasts. But so far the indications are that this might just end up being some of the annual vaccination programs or routine booster programs that we already have.
Mm-hmm. All right. Go ahead, Christine.
One of our next questions is, how can you know definitely that your DNA has not changed after the vaccine?
Okay, I think that is aimed at me because I made that claim. So I'm confident about that because people who participated in the trials have been vaccinated much longer than I have been. And we know that there has not been any reports. But also, so one of the things with science and in public health, there is a term, and I can't find of any other explanation or to simplify it, it's called biological plausibility. So biological plausibility is about, so what is the mechanism for getting the side effect or the desired effect? So you need to be able to explain, right, I get a jab, okay, so what happens next? And this is what happens, and that is the pathway. So that's the reason why when your doctor tells you to take paracetamol when you've got a toothache, there is a biologically plausible explanation of what happens when the paracetamol gets into your stomach, how it gets absorbed, and how it gets to the place where you've got the pain. So that is an explainable pathway. The issue around my DNA being affected is not biologically plausible. So I cannot explain how a synthetic messenger RNA could then affect my DNA. The science, so some of us, when we were in primary school, our teachers used to say 1 minus 4, it can't. So far, it can't. It is not biologically plausible for some of the side effects that people are talking about. There is no biological way of arriving at that answer. They're basically jumping so many stages. And my grade 2 teacher would say, show me your working so that I can see how you've got that answer.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Kunonga. That example is so clear in my mind because I remember many times in my maths class where I could say it can't. I would like to thank you, Professor Kunonga and Dr. Lovemore, for taking time to talk to us this afternoon. Loads of information, lots of questions. I've taken down all the questions that are in the chat. We will make an effort as the youth team to get those questions answered somehow and somehow distribute that Q&A, whether it's another form of a session like this or whether it's via our various platforms. But I'd like to thank you once again for joining, or everyone who's dialed in, whether you're on YouTube or on Zoom. I hope you have a blessed rest of the day. And Dr. Lovemore, if you could please pray for us as we close our program today.
Let us pray. Gracious Father, what above, we thank you for this privilege to learn more about our body, how fearfully and wonderfully we're made. We thank you for the little hairs in our nose, which trap organisms, and the little hairs and the little ovens in our nose, which warm up the air. We thank you for the ciliary function of some of these cells, which move mucus and all this stuff. We thank you for the barriers you've put in our systems to protect us. We thank you for the antibodies, which we knew nothing about, which you have put in our system so that we can fight against diseases. And we thank you for the memory cells, which remember bugs and fight for them. All these things is not because the scientist has planted them, but it's because you have fearfully and wonderfully made us. We appreciate the covering of angelic hosts who are champions around us, who protect us from physical injury, but also the angelic hosts whom you send around us will protect us from infectious diseases. When we do our best to protect ourselves, we thank you for the unseen hand that is in control, protecting the elderly, the adults, the vulnerable. Your hand is still protecting the children, the mothers, the fathers. Your hand is still protecting us, Lord. We're in gratitude that you have seen us, made us see the disease, experience the disease. While we've buried our friends and relatives, some are still recovering. Some of us are going to have long COVID. The unknowns are yet to be faced by us. But for those who are well and healthy, I'm asking, Lord, that you continue to protect them. Yeah. Put your hand and your hug around them and avoid them, allow them to avoid experiencing COVID infection. So, Father, we ask in the name of Jesus, we ask that you yourself cover Stevenage Church as a whole, cover those on YouTube watching, those watching on Facebook, cover them. Cover them with your grace. Protect them, Lord, from the devastating effects of this disease. Mm-hmm. Protect the BAME community. Mm-hmm. Protect the Caucasians. Protect those in good postcodes. Protect those in bad postcodes. Mm. Protect them. Protect those with faith in science. Protect those with no faith. Protect the doubters. Protect those with misinformation or malinformation or disinformation because of your grace. Mm. Protect them. Mm. Protect those who know and those who don't, just because of your grace, protect them. And above all, today we bring forward to you this afternoon, Stevenage Youth. We're seeing young people running a program of huge implications across all age groups. Yet they're asking questions on our behalf. Protect the Stevenage Youth and those on YouTube and those on Facebook and those who are across the whole globe. By your grace, already you've made sure the coronavirus has good outcomes in this age group. So I'm asking, Lord, protect Stevenage young people. As we part this afternoon, Lord, I am asking for your blessing on Stevenage Church. As the church will bring this program before the world, bless them. Bless Elder Stanley. Bless everybody who's watched. Bless Elder Kunonga, his family, and his time is taken to continue to join us and share with us and heal us to the fullest. Those of us still coughing and spluttering, by your grace, touch and heal us. Amen. Those who are yet to experience it, may they derive comfort from the fact that you alone can save. You alone can save. We part under the grace and coverage of Christ. In Christ, and we pray.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Dr. Lovemore. And thank you once again as well, Professor Kunonga. Dr. Lovemore, we wish you a speedy recovery. I can see you're still on your way, but we know that the Lord will pull you through completely. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you very much, Dr. Kunonga. Thank you very much, Dr. Prof. Kunonga, Dr. Nganunu. Thank you, guys. God bless you. Good discussion.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting us. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. And we hope to see you on our next program from Stevenage Youth. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Prof. Kunonga, thank you.
God be the glory. Thank you.
Thank you.
Elder Stan, thank you.
Thank you very much, Brother.
Thank you.
Impromptu contribution there.
Thank you.
Oh, Ruba, wonderful. Tema and Christine, thank you so much, guys. Thank you. Well done.
Well done. Hello,
Thank you.
elders.
Grace, good to see you. How's my brother?
Yeah, it's fine.
Fantastic. Good. Good. Family is all right.
It's fine. Okay.
We thank God. We thank God. Good to see you.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Wills. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Everybody.
Thank you,
Thank you
Esther.
everyone for the wonderful